You want me to read those things yet? Did I get
It will be out today. It'll take about 2 weeks.
We never know.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Yes.
I guess at this moment we'll start. It's always a little awkward when I do fill in a role like this, sort of sensing the audience. What's out there, what's not out there, should I duck? Anyway, so my name is Tristan Johnson. I served in the Air Force 69 to 73. I was a North Vietnamese linguist and therefore spent time eavesdropping. Try not to do it now on our kids, right? And so that they have their private lives. My job today in sort of facilitating how this process goes is to make it clear what the simple ground rules are. The strongest emphasis will be on the speakers and what they're obligated to. So let me read the guidance that comes from Vet Town Hall, which began in 2015. It was an impulse to try to follow up on the need for communities and veterans to figure out how to recognize each other, connect with each other, and respect each other. So, in the tradition of warrior storytelling, today veterans will describe the pride, grief, rage, or quiet reverence that the experience of war has bestowed on them. Each veteran will have 10 minutes to speak out about his or her service and what it means to them. This event is solemn and completely non-political. There will be no question and answer period until afterwards when we're all done. And then you're welcome to visit with the speakers. No discussion of U.S. foreign policy, no debate on the merits or justifications of war. We are simply here to listen and learn about what it was like to serve in the wars that this nation has chosen to fight. At this moment, I'd like to read a piece that I saw in the Museum of American Indian that had to do with indigenous connection to having been a warrior and coming back into their tribe to try to become a tribal warrior on behalf of the tribe. Many Native nations have considered war a negative force that throws nature and communities out of balance, requiring ceremony to restore equilibrium. For individuals, ceremonies offer protection in battle and cleansing upon return to help manage the physical and psychological damage caused by combat. Families and communities often participate in ceremonies to express support, recognize the sacrifice, and encourage the warrior's return to everyday life. And that's really the most important role you all will fill today. So, the basics. First, I'd like to thank Russ for showing up. He's the town historian, recording everything that happened, probably some that's worthwhile, and then he has the obligation to edit it all. Thank you very much, Russ. But I think that if anybody here has any concerns or reservations about being recorded, please let Russ know when you're up here to speak so he knows to not record if that is your preference. In order for the town hall to be successful, my role is to ensure that the event honors the following agreements and expectations. A number of veterans have already indicated to us that they'd like to speak. We have 11. I'll introduce each by name, branch, occupation, and years of service. Once all the predetermined veterans have gone, I'll open up the floor to other veterans, attendees, to speak. Each veteran will have 10 minutes to speak about what their service means or meant to them. You do not need to use the full 10 minutes, so if you need to be conservative, go right ahead. But we ask that you do not go over 10 minutes either. We also ask that you tell us about your own experiences, so please don't philosophize, don't digress into that broad world that's related to veteran military life. Really make it personal. We'd like to hear about you and what you feel and where you are. You are a member of our community, and it's your stories, reflections, and insights that we are anxious to hear. Non-veterans, you all who are here to listen, also have a crucial role to play. Listening without judgment or interruption is one of the most powerful supportive acts a person can offer. And that is what is expected of veterans and non-veterans alike. You may hear something you disagree with, you may have a question, or you may want to say encouraging words with the intention to help. However, we ask that you refrain from commenting in any way during the event. If veterans wish to continue a conversation with you afterwards, that is entirely up to them. But the point of this event is simply to give veterans a chance to speak and to bring the community closer to them. At this point, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Frank Weatherby. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kristen. As Tristan just said, my name is Frank Weatherby. I served in the United States Army for 20 years. From August of '65 till 1 November of 1986. I retired at the old age of 39. I am now on my 38th year of retirement. I retired at the rank of First Sergeant. I served in Vietnam for 3 years, Cambodia for 1 year, Thailand for 2 years, Philippines for 4 years. You might notice a trend there. Half my career was spent in Southeast Asia, and all the while I wanted to go to Germany. That's the way it works. It's my intent to introduce this community to basic combat training, or sometimes known as boot camp, and the role of the drill sergeant as you're going through basic combat training. In 1965, I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey for my basic training. The name of my drill sergeant was Staff Sergeant Bobby Biggs, meaner than a junkyard dog. And how many remember the drill sergeant or TI? Yeah, amazing. Anybody want to comment? A couple of comments on the drill sergeant or TI, and the Air Force TI, and for the Navy, their RCDs. Anybody want to comment?
Come on.
Please.
Very disciplined.
Very disciplined. Thank you. What was his name?
Kevin Crow.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Sergeant First Class Reynolds. Probably the sharpest soldier I ever met in my life. He was my drill sergeant. I was his platoon leader. And I don't think I ever came across, and he had served in Korea with the 1st Cavalry, and it was an honor to be underneath him.
Okay, thank you.
Sergeant Eric Anderson, and he helped me perfect push-ups.
Yeah. How do you become a drill sergeant? You become a drill sergeant by attending a drill sergeant academy. It's a 6-week course that trains, educates, certifies, and validates a non-commissioned officer's ability to execute and teach the core tenets of basic combat training, which includes physical readiness training, drill and ceremonies, basic rifle marksmanship, and battle drills. You have to commit to memory a drill and ceremonies manual and a physical training manual. That's about 3/4 inch thick. You have to literally memorize half of it. That includes 3 conditioning drills and 10 exercises each in order to graduate. It's a lot of memory, but it's got to be word perfect. Inasmuch as leadership is an art, not a science, the Academy must professionally train and develop character that are capable of transforming civilian volunteers to soldiers. The Academy establishes standards, drives improvement, and leads change to ensure drill sergeants produce soldiers that are highly trained, disciplined, and physically fit, mentally and spiritually tough, and morally grounded. Upon successful completion of the Drill Sergeant Academy, you are awarded a campaign hat. This current hat, Drill Sergeant hat, evolved from the 1883 campaign hat. So. It was adopted for wear by the Army in 1911 and abandoned in 1942. In 1964, the hat was reintroduced to become a proud symbol of the drill sergeant. The drill sergeants wear the campaign hat as a testament of their demonstrated professionalism, commitment to the mission, and proven leadership. The hat further symbolizes the lineage of the past, present, and future of the U.S. Army. Now I'm going to get into basic training. Weeks 1 and 2. First of all, you start off at a reception center. You get your hair cut off, all your shots, your military clothing issued, and then it's time to go to your company. Shakedown. See if this sounds familiar, veterans. When you get off the bus from the reception center, you'll be told to line up with your duffel bag, see whether you follow instructions. Then you'll be ordered to empty your duffel bag. If any contraband falls out, i.e. candy bars, Twinkies, or any such stuff, otherwise referred to as pokey bait. If any contraband falls out, it will be your first opportunity to see a drill sergeant go ballistic. The goal of this phase of training is to begin your transformation from a confused volunteer to a confident soldier. You'll learn the fundamentals of soldiering to include Army history as well as Army values. Most of the classroom training occurs during this time. One of the neat things when I was a drill sergeant was taking my soldiers to equal opportunity training. You have it 2 times, 2nd week and 7th week. 2nd week, the drill sergeants can't go. And let me tell you, the soldiers get in there and they call their drill sergeants everything but nice. They let loose. A lot of expletives to describe them. That's 2nd week. 7th week, they go back in there, they're a week from graduation, and all of a sudden the drill sergeant's a hero, great guy, admire him, and nothing's changed with the drill sergeant, but the perception of the soldier has. You will undergo Army physical fitness tests to assess your physical abilities. You'll have several of these tests along the way to be sure you're getting in the best possible shape. Obviously, it's an intense training schedule geared toward reinforcing the principles of discipline and teamwork. From here, you'll move forward to the rifle range to learn some very useful skills. Weeks 3 through 5, basic rifle marksmanship focuses on developing your combat skills with special emphasis on weapons and physical fitness training. You'll learn how to identify, track, target, and engage targets with a rifle. It is all about marksmanship. Spending time on these skills also hones your self-discipline and, again, teamwork. By now, you'll start to get the hang of military life. You may even think your drill sergeant's noticing your improvement. You are developing all the essential soldier skills which you'll put together in the next phase. Next phase for week 6 through 8. The final phase of individual tactical training will increase your leadership skills and self-discipline and improve your understanding of teamwork. It also will include challenges and tests you'll have to pass in order to graduate from basic combat training. It's time to dig deep. One of the last indicators while I was under that was a 25-mile tactical march. That was the last thing to be done in order to graduate. Graduation, the finality is about soldiers and their families. And I enjoyed meeting parents after the parade and the pass-in review. And they'd come up and say, "How'd you do that?" "We had them for 18 years. You only had them for 8 weeks. How'd you do that?" It's a proven formula. They're given responsibility and they're held accountable. Right? Push up on?
Exactly.
Thank you for the opportunity to present what a drill sergeant does and what your sons or daughters will experience upon initial entry training into the armed forces. Thank you.
The one word that came to my mind as he was speaking was unit and unity. Gerald Malloy, you're up.
Thought I was going to be last. Thank you. My name is Gerald Malloy, and first I want to say thank you to Vets Town Hall. I don't mind being filmed or anything like that. For having these events. I've gone to a few different places in Vermont. I did want to also thank, I mentioned Sebastian Younger. I think he's one of the founding people that started Vets Town Hall. I met him last year up at the Vets Summit up in Lyndonville, and if you ever get a chance to hear him speak, he's a great speaker and a great champion for the military and for veterans. Most of all today, I did want to say thank you to veterans. In my opinion, veterans are the reasons that we continue to enjoy liberty and freedom and rights of the Constitution. So for myself, I'm a little bit about me. I'm 18 years old. I was born in Boston, 18. I was fortunate enough to be accepted to go to West Point, so I went to West Point for 4 years. That was a great experience for me. I learned a lot about leadership and responsibility. I was fortunate not to have to go to summer school, which was one of my big objectives here. And I was commissioned as a field artillery officer, and then I went spent 22 years in active duty. I think the first gentleman wanted to be stationed in Europe. That was my first assignment. Was in Hanau, Germany. So I supported defending the Fulda Gap during the Cold War. It's actually a nuclear-capable direct support unit there. The rest of my career, I spent 5 years at Fort Bragg, served some in the Middle East, in Jordan, served in the Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Persian Gulf, so that was Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Kuwait, and also a couple of times in Korea. So I'm very appreciative for all the experiences and opportunities that the military gave me. Also, and the lasting friendships that come with that, and actually some of the humor, which I always enjoy that. As an academy grad, there's always a lot of ribbing between the Army, and Air Force, and Navy, particularly leading up to one of the big football games. So I've always kind of enjoyed that. I was driving down here today. I was thinking, I know this isn't politically correct, but one of my first assignment, one of my old NCOs, Vietnam vet, we were talking about something, he's like, yeah, what, you know, if the Army wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued you one, or something like that. So, I also liked in the Army that, you know, the two best units in the Army were the, you know, last unit you were in and the next unit you were going to. I always thought that was kind of funny. But shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to share some thoughts, and I'll kind of come full circle in this. But last year I had a young man that supported me in a couple of different events, 18 years old, very patriotic, very energetic. And as I got to know him a little bit, at one point I said, hey, you're thinking about joining the military, you're joining the Army. And I don't want to upset anyone, but his answer was basically not no, but hell no. And he had some ideas about what was going on in the military. And so we talked about that, and I said, well, you know, perceptions, and you might want to think about, you know, not necessarily fully believing everything you hear or see. My experience in the Army was very, very positive, and it was a great environment, and it was really all about, you know, mission, focus on the mission, and as you mentioned, unity, being part of a team. I enjoyed that. I'm grateful for that, and I think you might enjoy that also. So that was kind of one conversation. I also met, you know, a lot of Vermonters last year, kind of had the same concerns about our military. And what I wanted to relay here is, so for the last 15 years, I've been in the defense industry. That's given me the honor and privilege, in my opinion, to engage military folks all the time, every rank, you know, O10 to E1, all the services. And I would report to you that I think our Army's in good shape. And not perfect, but in very good shape. And I can tell you, I have personally spoken to the new Army Chief of Staff very recently. I've met the brand new Sergeant Major of the Army very recently. I met the Superintendent out of West Point very recently. I think the Army's in good leadership. And most recently, did anyone hear of the AUSA conference down in Washington, D.C.? Anybody hear of that? Huge conference in Washington, D.C. It was just about a month ago, 3 days. Tens of thousands of people go to that. I would, if you ever have the chance, I would recommend it. It's free, you can go. And I went, you know, in October, met many, many, many folks. What I see and felt was that the Army today is chock full of dedicated soldiers that will perform their, you know, what they swore to, what we all swore to, is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So I wanted to pass that along. 2 minutes, okay, real quick. I did want to say I've been asked to speak at a couple of veterans events, and that made me kind of think about my own, you know, why I wanted to serve. And looking back at my childhood, I know I played on a travel hockey team, and when I was young, I went through a trip to West Point and saw that around 5th grade, and I know that left a lasting impression on me. But the more I think about it, as I've been thinking about the last month or so, I really think it's the people that impacted my life. And I mentioned earlier, I played hockey. I played 4 years of high school hockey, and my coach was a Marine Corps drill sergeant. And I played my high school baseball. My baseball coach was a Korean War veteran. And my hockey coach at West Point was a World War II naval aviator. The interesting thing is, none of them ever actually tried to push the military on me, but I think what happened, I know what happened, is I observed their character. And I think that's what impacted me and my desire to serve and be part of the Army. And in closing, what I'd like to say is I think, you know, all veterans, you have that character, and I would encourage you to engage young people and maybe have a positive impact on them, and I think a positive impact on our future here in the United States. So, thank you very much.
Well, I blew it for the first two. I was supposed to announce name, rank, service, years, and where. Sorry. Rank, Gerald. Bill Toomey, you're up next, so let me read. Bill Toomey served in the Army as a medic in C Company 1st Battalion, 14th Infantry, And there's a November 66 to 68, and I suspect that was Vietnam?
True.
Mark?
Yes.
Yes. Bill, you're up. And as he's walking up, all of you, I'd just like you, as you listen to what they say, what are some of the attributes they're talking about that they developed that are part of their persona, that they're using to give back? Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
I had doubts about whether I should actually be here speaking to anyone about my military experience. I did not enjoy being in the military, right up front about it. It's not my thing. I went into the military because the options were to go to jail or to leave my country forever, and I chose to go into the Army. I was a conscientious objector in the Army. That means I served, but without weapons training, and I never carried a weapon. I was trained as a medic. All conscientious objectors who go into the Army are trained as medics. Those who cannot take that training are then trained as company clerks. But 98% of all conscientious objectors in the Army, and there probably are none these days, in fact, I'm pretty sure there are none, are trained as medics. Well, that being said, I would be remiss in my duty if I didn't say that being 2 years in the Army left me with the greatest stock of stories I could ever have hoped to come up with. I mean, incredible experiences, amazing events, and since I think at the start Tristan indicated that we were going to familiarize those in the audience who may not be familiar with it with some sort of combat experience, I will go ahead and fill you in with a tale of mine, of which there are many, as I said. Many were amusing, actually, even those that came out of combat. And I'm going to tell you one now that's pretty interesting. In our infantry unit in Vietnam, we always had 4 scouts assigned to us, 2 from the Army of the Republic of South Vietnam, and 2 who had been fighters for the North that had fought for years for the North Vietnamese, and then, as they called it at the time, Chuhoid, or surrendered to the South to be repatriated. They went through repatriation, and then were assigned as scouts to the infantry companies. We had 4 of them. I was fascinated by them because my assignment in Vietnam basically kept me in the jungle almost all the time. Our duty was basically to run interference with the supply lines coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And we operated in a very small area around the town of Kon Tum, which basically stood on the border between Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. So we were basically patrolling in the jungle all the time. We'd be called back every 10 days to 2 weeks to a small fire base where we'd get fresh clothes, 1 hot meal, a night's rest, and then back out there. But I developed a certain friendship with one of the 4 scouts. His name was Hone. And he was one of the guys that had fought for the North. And I was very curious about him for that history. And we had a number of interesting things together. One curious one was that we had a very limited ability to communicate. I spoke a little bit of French, he spoke a little bit of French, a little bit of English, and I spoke no Vietnamese. So a lot of it was signing and stuff like that. But one night we were sitting outside smoking and thinking about life, and he started to try to tell me about something. It took me a long time to get it, but I realized he was trying to tell me about a book, a story that he had once read in English in his grammar school. And he desperately wanted to communicate to me what this story was about. And we went back and forth and back and forth, moments of silence, back and forth. And finally, I can't remember what it was that triggered it, but all of a sudden I turned and I said, Hone. I said, the legend of Sleepy Hollow. And he looked at me like that, and then he just burst into tears. I mean, that degree of communication had been so profound, the stress of getting to that moment was so tremendous that he just broke down and wept. I mean, he was a very curious guy. The other thing was, one day we were out on patrol in some very dense jungle area, and we kind of got off the trail that we were on. Finally, we broke for lunch, and everybody had, well, Hone, of course, unlike the rest of us who were opening our tins of turkey loaf or pork and limas, don't even remind me of that meal. Hone would always cook up his little bucket of rice. Well, he got out his heat taps and he cooked up his bucket of rice, and just about the time the rice was ready, the captain said, okay, let's go, boys, move it. And Hone looked around and he said, Hone, dish that stuff. So Hone dumped the rice by the trail side, and off we went. Well, we wandered here and there, and of course we had a guy up front with a compass and a map, but what are you going to do in the middle of a dense jungle when you can't shoot an azimuth on anything? I mean, you can't see anything except the trees around you. Well, we walked around, and we began to get a little concerned. It was pretty clear we were lost, and it was probably about an hour before it would begin to get dark. And suddenly, we're walking along, and Hone stops, and he looks down, and there is his pile of rice for lunch. And Hone walks right to the front of the line. He says, follow, follow! And he just started off through the jungle. And the captain hesitated for a few moments, and then he said, follow that man! We walked like right straight through the jungle and right to the fire base. He knew exactly where we were going. And those were the two stories about Hone. I don't know whatever came of him. I can't imagine it went well for him once the country fell to the north. But I wish him well wherever he is. I hope he's still alive. He was a very intelligent and inventive guy. And that's the tale. So I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, Wendy and I went to Vietnam in February this year, south and north, and have really warm feeling for those we met. Jim Murguita, you're up. Jim served 3 years, 67 to 70 in the U.S. Army, in Vietnam, 68 to 69. And he's on his way. Thank you, Jim.
Shows you what I'm going to speak about today is that folks grabbed my arm, helped me up, made sure I walked through safely, didn't fall down, because I've done that before in this very room. The subject of my speech is brotherhood. We all, veterans, know that word. I'd like to add sisterhood, because I see a lot of women here today, which is very nice. It's the same thing. My story begins with one brotherhood, which was my fraternity when I was in college in 1967, just ready to graduate. No idea. Completely numb to anything associated with Vietnam or the war. I was a college senior. I'd been in a fraternity for 5 years. I was happy-go-lucky. I was having a grand time. But I had fraternity brothers who truly liked each other and loved each other and looked out for each other and took care of each other. It wasn't until I graduated that I realized something's different about my environment. I'm not going to get drafted. And I avoided it for as long as I could. I re-enrolled in school, I did this and I did that, but I couldn't avoid it any longer. I knew I was going to get drafted, so I enlisted. One of the poorest decisions of my life, but in any event. I enlisted, went to basic training, AAT, all this other stuff. My enlistment was a little different than some of the others. At the time, they guaranteed you a direction. Mine was, as I figured out, was the signal corps, which they don't fight. I mean, they talk to each other on the telephone. I don't know what they do. But in any event, they said, since you were a college graduate, you could go to OCS, signal corps, and become an officer. Even better. I mean, you know. Well, short story, because I only have 10 minutes. I never went to OCS for the Signal Corps. I went to the infantry OCS. The Army decided at the time they were going to close the Signal Corps OCS and send me to the infantry OCS, which at the time, people told me was pretty much a death sentence. The average life of a second lieutenant in Vietnam was 20 minutes. But anyway, you don't decide, well, I'm sorry you didn't fulfill your promise, I'm out of here. No, you don't do that. Not in the U.S. Army or any other military base that I know. And I'm not telling any veteran anything they don't already know. Went to OCS, graduated, became a second lieutenant, and waited for my orders, which I knew were where I was headed, which was Vietnam, 1967. At the end of, 68, the end of the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, which is the year of the Tet. It's a holiday where they invaded the city of Hue and pretty much decimated it. I arrived at the end of that with a little group of soldiers who were assigned to me, and that's a whole other story. In any event, we ended up, of all places, in Hue. They separated the enlisted men and the officers. Why they do that, I don't know, but anyway. We were in the imperial city of Hue, which is very ornate and ceremonial, that sort of thing, which was somewhat not damaged. I had my own private room, which was like an oriental suite. Marvelous, just beautiful, beautiful room and building. And even some folks that I'd grown close to as we moved through Vietnam. Incidentally, I should say this, if you haven't heard this before. The entry to Vietnam at whatever airport you arrive at or base or whatever, the entry, the first thing you feel is fear, number one, and secondly, the immense, intense heat and smell, which is entirely different from anything you've ever experienced before in your life. Not only was I unaware as a college senior what was going on in Vietnam, I still didn't know. I really didn't. I had lots of training, but you don't know what to expect. So here I am in a city in Vietnam, and these fellows come up to me and say, hey, you want to go play some basketball? And I said, well, are you kidding? And they said, no, we found there's a basketball court out there. It's lighted. It's night. And I said, why not? So, not wanting to wear my olive drab t-shirt because I hated olive drab. I didn't want to wear my white one because that's a target. So we went off skinless, you know, we played skins and shirts or whatever. So we headed out there, and we had to wind through the city to get to the outskirts, which is where the basketball court was. And we're walking through, and we're walking through a bunch of tables and chairs and desks and this and that. We walked through the tent area, and all of a sudden I stopped. I don't know why I stopped, I just stopped. I looked to a line of soldiers who were in fatigues, carrying duffel bags, in line. In the Army, you wait in line an awful lot. And I looked at the line and I said, "Jeepers, I wonder what they were doing." Then I figured it out. They were going home. Their uniforms were no longer all drab, they're almost white. They're so faded and worn. And they were basically standing or sitting or leaning up against their duffel bags. And I was actually very happy for them. Wish I was one of them, but I wasn't.
Yeah.
And 2 minutes? All right. Anyway, I promised I wouldn't say that word. I looked and looked and looked at that line for some reason. Come to find out, one of the fellows looked like someone I knew. So I walked closer and found out, as I got closer to him, I noticed that it was my fraternity brother from my senior year of college, who was my best friend. His name was John. I said, "John?" He would turn around. He said, "Jim?" And I said, "John?" He said, "Jim." And it was probably my best friend in the world, who was my fraternity brother in college, who was leaving to go home, who I'd actually spoken to. And in the middle of Vietnam, I met up with him. Entirely an actor, supreme being. Couldn't have been. I made it home that year, in exactly a year. He was the best man at my wedding. We met up and cried twice. Once when he left, and once when I got home. So that's my story, brotherhood, sisterhood.
Yeah, it's amazing, this brotherhood. Just showing that you're wearing a hat like a Vietnam vet, you can say hello to anyone and be wrapped in warm welcome and acknowledgement of what you share together. And so it's a universal, intuitive language. Dave Robinson, you're up. If I better read the right one. Dave served in the Army, 92 to 2000, operations.
Uphold democracy in Haiti.
Uphold democracy. Thank you, Dave. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is David Robinson. I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut. And when I turned 18, I decided to join the Connecticut Army National Guard as a military police officer. And, so got to go drill 1 weekend a month and 2 weekends a year. And that was in 1992. And then after going to basic training in military police school, and getting to shoot automatic weapons and play with hand grenades, I was like, this is cool. And I also was living at my parents' house and going to a community college and hoping to get hired as a police officer. And so I decided to go on to active duty, and that's where I could get some real world experience. And I decided I wanted to become a paratrooper. And so my first duty assignment on active duty was down at Fort Benning, Georgia, going to basic airborne course. And people always ask me, what makes you want to jump out of a perfectly good airplane? You get asked all the time. And it's pretty simple. being able to do something that makes absolutely no sense, none whatsoever, putting on a heavy parachute and a rucksack, getting on a really hot aircraft, flying up in the air, and then they take 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Outboard personnel, stand up. Inboard personnel, stand up. Hook up your static line, which deploys your main parachute. And it's just so much muscle memory. But yet it's really scary every time. And you gotta like take that fear and put it away, put it someplace else. Because everybody on that aircraft is thinking the same damn thing you are. Anybody who's not scared to do that realizes that you can get hurt really bad and die. But like you learn to overcome that fear. And that helped me not too much later, of confronting death, something that's scary and unknown. And just being kind of calm about it. It's a weird sensation. You know, so my first duty assignment was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was with the 118th Military Police Company, an airborne unit, part of 18th Airborne Corps. It was really tough being what's called cherry in a new airborne unit. Your life sucks. Like everybody's just dropping you to see how many push-ups you can do. And every time you get dropped, you have to knock out 20 push-ups, and then it's one for the mighty Master Blaster in the sky, one for the 118th MP Company Airborne, one for 4th Platoon, one for 2nd Squad, one to recover. So there's 25 every time. They just do this all damn day. But it's, you got to prove yourself and show you're worthy of being in that unit, being part of the team, and how to put up with being picked on. Because somebody will find your weakest thing, something that bothers you the most, and just turn that knob up, see what your reaction is. And luckily, my time as a cherry was short-lived, because I got this new roommate, Robert Booth, and he was tore up from the floor up. He took all the attention away from me. And then on September 18th, or maybe 17th, 18th, we found out we were going to go invade Haiti in 1994. And I was like, wow, this is for real now. I'm going on my first deployment. And we didn't really know what to expect. And so on the 19th of September, we landed at Port-au-Prince Airport, seized the airport and took over. We got there in the middle of the night. I woke up to the sunrise, seeing this absolute sea of human bodies behind the fence at the airport. And we're looking at them, they're looking at us. And it was this overwhelming heat you could feel, and the smell of unwashed bodies. And the smiles on their faces that we were coming there to help them and oust the military dictator that started a coup. And we were going to restore President Aristide to power, the rightfully elected president. But the rules of engagement changed all the time. It was a dangerous place of violence and poverty and struggle like I have never seen. And trying to figure out best how we could help this country and how to disarm the military force that were a bunch of thugs who raped, killed, extorted to get whatever, to take whatever they wanted from the people. Suddenly now all these angry former military men were out of a job, and we took their weapons away. And it really put me in some difficult positions, the things I had to see and experience. What it's like to come up on a riot where people are starving and they found out some rice is in a Connex locked container, and they're trying everything they can to bust that thing open and carry what they can away in any, just holding up their t-shirt and filling it up. And what that's like mentally to be surrounded by this whole mob of people that really wants to get to that food. What it's like to point your weapon at somebody and show them you're going to blow their head off, and how scary that is. And after experiencing those kind of things, something inside me changed. And I could never go back to pre that experience. And it really messed me up. It was just like an absolute mental goat rope. And I had to hide that hurt, and that feeling inside of my heart, and my brain, things I couldn't unsee, just keep it hidden, just drive on with the mission. So after a 4-month deployment to Haiti, went back to Fort Bragg. And I got selected to go test drive a new vehicle the Army was buying, a family of medium tactical vehicles, a 2.5-ton, 5-ton truck. I never driven anything that big before. It was cool. And we had to like test drive these things every night, so many miles of different terrain. It was getting paid to go off-roading. It was so cool. And so finished that test up, got a cool little certificate out of it and stuff. And then I found out my unit was going back to Haiti for another 6 months or so. And so it was just like, damn, I gotta go back there. So I had to go back to Haiti and do another 6 months. And somehow I made it through that second time by just doing the same avoidance behaviors, not thinking about stuff too much, just blocking it out. And I finally got back. And while I was in Haiti, my sergeant major asked me what I wanted to do after that deployment. And I said, I want to go to canine school and be a dog handler. He said, well, let's put the paperwork in. So I get back after my second deployment, and they're like, I was looking forward to taking leave, going home to Connecticut. And they're like, oh, you're going to canine school in 7 days out in Texas. That's like just the greatest feeling. And so I go to Lefferman Air Force Base and learn how to do patrol and detection work, training dogs to find people, narcotics, and explosives. It was the neatest thing to have like this team you're developing.
Dave?
2 minutes. And yeah, becoming a dog handler really helped me mentally kind of focus on my dog and my skills, and not focused on the trauma I experienced. And just my connection with the animal runs deep to this day. My best friend is my dog. And it's a big thing to trust your life to an animal. And your military dog also outranks you by 1 pay grade. You know, so if you don't treat it right, you can be charged with dereliction of duty, not feeding an NCO. Yeah, so I think that's my story. Thank you very much.
We'll do one more and then take about a 10-minute break. You all can digest that or digest what you've been listening to. Lucas. Oh, yeah. Lucas lived in a tube in his military career. He was in the Navy in a submarine. And didn't have much of a scenic view, I guess. That was 14 to 19, and called himself an underwater.
We got a view of New London and a view of the Chinese looking right back at us.
And the jellyfish?
The old joke he told was that the Chinese were renting real estate from the area directly adjacent to the Coast Guard Academy. Because when we were at the shipbuilding yard at Electric Boat, which is where I was, because I was a pre-commissioned unit submarine, I got there when our submarine was still in 2 pieces. They had to float from North Kingston, the face, down so they could put it in, slide all the modules that they were building for habitability in there. So I'm going to hope to try and add some elucidation to what life was like being on a submarine. One of my favorite stories was an underway story. My first underway was with the Missouri. I had been assigned to another submarine, the Vikings. Who does the football team Vikings? Minnesota, yeah, what a forgettable boat. They were the new flow boat. They had the problem with their primary coolant welds, and every time they did an x-ray of their primary coolant, they found issues. And New Flow was the contractor company that was responsible for making them correct, and they were not. and they didn't. So we never actually got underway with that boat. But I went underway with the Missouri, who was the prize fighter of the submarine force at the time, and the Mighty Mo. That was a lot of fun. I did bring the movie Battleship, the awesome blockbuster with Rihanna in it. I couldn't even finish it on the Mighty Mo. I couldn't watch the movie, the Battleship. It was awful. But I got to qualify on there, and qualifying submarines is a big deal. You get to wear your fish you don't get to otherwise. What it means is you've been through the rigors of training, done all of the things that you can show, and you can perform any basic function expected of any submariner, and you are a piece of the equipment on the submarine. Piece of the equipment on the submarine being the real way to look at it, because in our berthing, where we would have 18-man or skinny man, because you had literally the width of this podium to actually fit through between the racks, you'd have you and your best friend sleeping directly above you, and your best friend sleeping directly underneath you. So 3 high, but hot racking being the thing that it is, you'd have 3 best friends sharing 2 racks. So you'd have to plan appropriately which rack is going to be slept in, which one's going to be off-going. Hopefully they're not both in while you're on watch and you need something, because then they're sleeping on it. You can't get to it. Opens up coffin style. But once you're qualified in submarines, they kind of let up on you. They don't have to be on you to finish those tasks that you're working on so hard to ease up the burden on everybody else that's on the submarine and above you. So one of my favorite stories about being on a submarine was we had a culinary specialist, Carswell, who was kind of a country club, board shorts, sort of boat shoes kind of guy. I think his parents like owned a country club or something, but he was a cook underway. So not a lot of love for the cooks. One day he was the night baker for this particular underway. He got back to us by putting out a big tray sheet of yellow cake, and everybody thought, it's mid-rats, it's great. The night baker went above and beyond. Let's get some of this delicious yellow cake. I don't even care that it doesn't have frosting on it. And they took it and they take a bite, and instantly they realize it is not yellow bread, it is cornbread. And they do not tell the next person coming up to the crew's mess that on the buffet line there is not yellow cornbread. And I was doing the dishes at the time. That's what I got to do with my boat when we got underway. And we just got to watch one sailor after another, having the only physical comfort that they were looking forward to being ripped away from them and dashed against the rocks. And everybody sat there eating their dry cornbread, just fed with the nourishment of everybody else's disappointment. So that's kind of what it's like being on a submarine, what it's like being a part of the submarine core. You can't live on the boat. There's just not enough space. It's not a habitable place. There's 700-pound air compressors directly next to the rack that you're sleeping in. You don't want to stay there if you don't have to. So when we're in port, you're either in a foreign port, you're in the hot rack or hotel because there's not enough space for you. When you're in your home port, you're in the barracks, which were a lovely place to live. One morning I was on duty, which means you stay overnight with the boat, you're watching your security, you're there in case something goes wrong with the boat, and it's about 3:15 a.m. and Hill comes in. Hill's this short, stocky, huge fire control dude, and I go, Hill, you're a couple hours early for duty section turnover, what's up? And he goes, I couldn't get back to sleep, because he had been sleeping in his room and a cockroach ran across him right when he was on bed. They aren't even afraid of you anymore. And he woke up and he went, well, I guess I'm not getting back to sleep, and I'd rather go sleep on the boat for the rest of my duty day anyway than risk having another cockroach run over me. But so that's kind of what it's like being in submarines. Having to share all your space with everybody. One of my other favorite ones is the 1MC is the general announcing circuit on the submarine, and we have one guy who had a waiverable medical condition with his heart, but he needed medication for it. You think you wouldn't lose something on a sub. It's a finite space, it's 320 feet that way and this way, and there's always somebody in an area where you're never 2 arms length from your best friend, and we hear over the 1MC, has anyone seen Warren's heart medication? If you see Warren's heart medication, please turn it in to Doc. And they never found his medication, so he had to have some kind of generic steroid that kept whatever heart condition he had at bay, and he was uncomfortable with the whole underwear. He didn't like it. He did out better than the guy. There was one underway where we were steaming back into Groton, and one torpedoman got appendicitis, while another A-ganger was what I did. That was the general machinery job in the submarine. So if you weren't nuclear equipment or firing or navigation equipment, you were engineering equipment auxiliary. That's what we did. And one of our guys got a kidney stone. So he starts passing the kidney stone, while the other guy in the torpedo room is just kind of sweating and hoping that his appendix doesn't burst, and the whole time Doc is just ready, hoping to be the first Doc since like Vietnam to do an underway appendectomy. And they never did. They didn't even have to call a helicopter or anything. But, oh, yes, so the chow line is this long buffet line, and I'll just skip to the end. So while I was on the Missouri, I got to meet a radio man. I didn't get to know him very well, but while we were still in the building our submarine, our COG calls us into what was being used as the chief mess, and he sits me down and he says, "Well, do you remember this guy from the Missouri?" I say, "Yeah, I remember him." Well, he killed himself yesterday while he was on watch. He just took his flak jacket off, set it off to the side, took his service pistol, and boom! Hole right through and in out of his chest with his 9mm service pistol. So that's what being in submarines is like. Another time I was going to work, I parked in a parking lot, and I went to get into the side gate to get to the submarine because we were parked way down from headquarters. But the gate was closed because somebody who had been on watch last night killed themselves. So they shut down those side gates, and they were doing their investigation and everything. And one other time I was just in my barracks room. We were actually living in the chalet on base, which is kind of more like a hotel because we were pre-commissioned. We were at the pleasure of Electric Boat. And I heard a thud. I thought somebody was throwing stuff in my window until the next morning I get a knock on my door and I see base police. And I go, "Oh, is this about those people throwing stuff in a window?" And I could tell by the look at his face that wasn't the case. This isn't what had happened. So he takes my military ID, and now I'm made to go with the police because they have my military ID. You can't do anything without that. And I found out that the person below me was a nuke who was on the Illinois, which was the boat that was to commission right before the Colorado that I was on, and he had committed suicide the night before with a shotgun. That's what I heard was the report of him directly underneath me in the room. So that's also what submarines is like.
Wow. Usually no to take a break on, but let's take 10 minutes and enjoy the refreshments, and then we'll be reconvening. Mr.
Break. Get some food. Yeah.
Bob, I have to head out. I'm going up to see Bill Chase.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've got an appointment with him. Good to see you. Thanks, Bob.
I like you.
It's the bathroom.
In. What? Shut up. Yay. What? Well, we want to reconvene. That's going to be. That's your back there. Where Norman?
He's using you for example sometimes.
Ian, are you competing? There's a subtle but very loud request for more volume from the speakers. Apparently some people are speaking a little too quietly. So exercise your vocal cords and your lungs.
I didn't hear a word Luke said.
Come here and I'll blow in your ear.
You have a big problem.
Okay, our next speaker is, he is here. Dr. Bob Cordelani served in the Army, 68 to 70, in Vietnam. Vietnam, Colorado? No. Vietnam and also Colorado. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much.
And
Tristan,
I'll flag you in 2 minutes.
okay, don't take any minutes off now.
I won't, I promise.
I personally want to thank all of you who have come here today to listen. Again, it's one of the best things you could do for all of us veterans. And I'll say very quickly that I was very unfamiliar with the Army, which I became a member of, and also I am so happy to have done that because of the brotherhood that develops there, and that brotherhood after you're in the Army of being one of the veterans. It's just wonderful to be a veteran. So my story is a bit different from Frank Weatherby. As a matter of fact, I think if I were to have seen Frank Weatherby the week that I came into the Army, I probably would have been very, very, very frightened. If there were a name of the story, my story would be a doctor boot camp, and does the Army really know what to do with newly minted doctors? Okay. A little bit of background. I had the choice of going from my internship in 1967-68 into a residency called the Berry Plan. You either had the choice of doing that, 2 or 3 years more training, putting off your military obligation, or after your internship, going directly into the military. So all of us knew we were going to be drafted if we didn't do the Berry Plan. I was sick and tired of being a student for so long. I was ready for something different. Okay, my military experience started in the middle of March 1968 when I got a letter in the mail, and it said, Doctor, our captain, you're to report to Fort Sam Houston in Texas at the end of June 1968. Following that 8 weeks of training, you're going to be in Vietnam. You're going to fly to Vietnam. I knew that was coming. It wasn't a surprise. And I was getting myself ready. I didn't know a whole lot about the military. I had a dad who tried to get into the military in World War II. He had medical issues, could not get into the military. I had 3 uncles, all brothers of my mother who grew up on a farm in Connecticut. They all went into the military, 2 in the Army, 1 in the Army Air Corps, 1 in the Tank Corps, and 1 in the Navy. All of them were in combat. They all survived. And as a kid, I didn't see any physical or emotional scars. But I'm sure they were there. All I could see was heroism, those uniforms, and they actually came back, worked on the farm, and they actually paid me a quarter. I was 5 years old to hang out with them on the farm, and that was all great. And these guys were all heroes to me, and they're all passed on. They all lived into their 90s, but they're all passed on, but heroes. So that was my knowledge of the military. I learned very quickly about the military. I drove, after my internship was finished, I drove to Fort Sam Houston by car. And I did not meet a drill sergeant. It was kind of like, okay. I got there, they said, well, listen, we're going to put you up in motels off base, and you're going to come to these lectures. You're going to learn about tropical medicine, and you're going to learn how to take care of acutely ill people, stabilize them, get them to a surgical hospital or called evacuation hospital. So far so good. It was a little bit like medical school, a little bit, not too different. Did that, and 4 or 5 weeks went by out of my 8 weeks. But what about becoming a military doctor? Well, I mean, that involves you've got to learn to look a little bit like a military person. Yes, and they actually spent some time on that, no question. We had to learn how to drill. We had to learn how to march. We had to learn how to respond to a salute or how to salute. We had to learn how to dress in fatigues. We had to learn how to dress in formal dress. And there were 3 things that stood out about that training. One was going to a place called Camp Bullis, which was full of rattlesnakes, and particularly in the rifle pits. We had to learn how to fire a rifle. Doctors learning how to fire they actually asked us to carry a rifle if we were in a helicopter, got shot down, whatever. But anyway, we had to learn how to fire a rifle. They had an idea about taking 3 physicians with a compass, some water, and some food, and dropping us in the middle of nowhere by helicopter and saying, we'd like to have you get back from this X, location X to Y in the next 24 hours. And I mean, God, that was pretty darn scary, right? And they dropped us off. What the heck are we doing here? The good news is they knew that we were going to get lost. They knew we would not know what we were doing. Within a few hours, they picked us up. Honestly, there were not enough doctors around to sacrifice 3 doctors, knowing we were going to go to Vietnam in the next few weeks. The other thing I remember is I got hurt in a pickup basketball game. I really hurt my left knee. And I had, the next morning, it swelled up. I was in a great deal of pain. I went to the emergency department and they said, yeah, you got to be admitted to the orthopedic ward. But the trouble is, you have to do your own orders, and you have to write your own history and physicals. We don't have enough doctors here, so can you please do that? Believe it or not, that actually happened. I had to write my history and physical, my orders, and I ordered myself to bed rest with traction, which was good. I mean, it wasn't great to be at complete bed rest, I'll tell you. But anyway, it helped my knee, and they wanted to do surgery on me. I was on a 48-bed ward. All 47 of the other people were victims of injuries during Vietnam. They all had infections. And in a ward like that, if you agreed to surgery, you would also get infected. And I said, whatever the problem is, I'm going to let nature take its course. I do not agree to surgery. And interestingly, when you have something that's bothering you, that's affecting your function, they'll give you something that says, well, you're not allowed to run, stoop, or kneel in the next 4 weeks, right? So I went to Vietnam about 2 weeks later, and of course I was hobbling, but you know, you do whatever you have to do to stay alive once you're in a combat zone. So, oh, those 2 minutes. I'm getting very close. Okay, so thank you. So the last thing is 5,000 doctors standing at attention in one place. Half of all the doctors who got through their internship that year. I actually saw that. It was an amazing thing. What did I get out of this? It was a very, very interesting experience. We had a lot of shared camaraderie. It's the sort of thing you were going to get once you got to Vietnam in spades. And a lot of shared anxiety, getting ready to go on the plane. The plane was, the plane load of people was the quietest plane load of people I've ever seen in my life. And that was chapter 2, and that's to come. Okay, thank you.
Okay, now the father of Marine and military stories, whom we all revere every Tuesday morning, Norm Van Coor, who was a Marine, 68 to 71. He couldn't last longer than that. He had to get out.
Go, Norm. Let's go, Norm.
Hello, Norm.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm a recon Marine, and sadly, I don't much look like a recon Marine anymore. That's why when I'm up here with a book, I usually hold the book right here. And I was in Vietnam 1968 and 1969. I went over as a 20-year-old. And a recon Marine goes out with a 5-man team into the jungle. And we're given orders on a map, an area, to look for the enemy, find the enemy, and get whatever information that intelligence wants us to get. If we're lucky enough to get a prisoner, that's great. We don't bring bodies back. With a 5-man team in the jungle, you don't want contact with the North Vietnamese Army. We avoid contact at all costs. For Recon Marine, gets into a situation where we have contact with the enemy. What usually happens is that the 5-man recon team is never heard from again. And that happened quite often. Firefight with the enemy against 5 of us is going to be a bad thing for us. But what I wanted to really bring home and talk to you about is writing. After I turned 70, I realized that my 2 daughters and I had never talked about war. We'd never talked about my Marine Corps experience. And they knew about my Navy Cross, that I had been awarded the Navy Cross and the North Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, but we never talked much about my experience in Vietnam. So I decided to write a manuscript and tell them about it. I've always been good at writing and enjoyed English in college and written a lot of papers. So I wrote and wrote and wrote about everything, about what we were thinking in base camp and what we talked about. We didn't have cell phones in 1968 or emails and all of the communications that you would normally think of. We didn't have newspapers. There was no radio and TV. So we didn't know much about what was going on at home, and we didn't talk about what we were doing and write home about some of the horrors and different things. On the other hand, our parents and our families didn't tell us much about what was going on in the college campuses and the protests and all of that. So my girls knew very little, and I had a friend read my manuscript and convince me that I should write a book. So I did. And my message is that what I didn't know would happen was that it was good for me. Writing the book was therapeutic. It helped me sort out a lot of things that I, in many cases, had never thought of before in my writing. And when I was done and wrapped 2 of them up and gave them to my 2 girls on Christmas, there was a lot of crying. And they read it, and both of them said, "Geez, Dad, I know that you live. I know you're okay, but God, I'm reading your book and I'm biting my nails, you know, and then I'm laughing." So it was good for them, too. And I think that if you know veterans, if you have family and friends, and sometimes they might be struggling a little bit, it's good to write. It may be good for them. I'm a good writer, but you don't have to be. What you need to do is think about what you want to say and write it down. Sometimes when I was writing, more than once, I'm not ashamed to admit, that I had tears in my eyes. It got to me, what I was writing, because words are important. And you have to think about how you want to express yourself on the page, so that when you are writing, it doesn't have to be the perfect sentence, but it has to be from your heart, to be meaningful. And I think that's my message, is that if anyone wants to get beyond some of the trapped feelings and emotions that go on decade after decade, one possibility might be to write. I still get cards, letters, and emails from people that have bought my book across the country, either from Amazon or some other place. And they send me these messages and thank me for writing the book because it meant something to them. And then they commence to go on 3 or 4 or 5 paragraphs about their experience. It gets them to open up a little bit, and I never saw that coming. So it was a real, both an eye-opener and very rewarding that I'm able to communicate in this form with people that I don't know. So I wanted to bring this out. Maybe after we all break up, stop by. I'll be back here at the table. I have some of my books, and I'd love to talk to you about writing and some of what I've just been mentioning.
You didn't get to your 2 minutes.
Oh, he's got to come back.
I yield to my friend Tristan.
Thank you, thank you.
There.
I accept the yield. Just a minor digression. Our son said to me once about something I was doing, I didn't know that about you. And that drove me, while we were in Vietnam, to journal my feelings, my awareness, what I was feeling, and then added to that like 2 or 3 pages to describe me at the time I decided to go in the military. Because I felt like, as you, that I needed them to understand. I needed to communicate with them about that phase of life. Powerful, really powerful. Charles Monette, U.S. Army, Air 1st Cavalry, Vietnam, July 1970, June 15, 1971. Combat wounded veteran. Welcome.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here this afternoon. I found out about this last night and decided to put together a little bit of information to share with you. It's not exactly by the rules here, but I hope I don't break rules. So, as I was just listening about sometimes, I'm a writer as well. Sometimes I can't spend my time doing this. All right, here we are. This is a story of online dating as a veteran, Vietnam veteran. One of the first times I did this, I met a woman who was a research librarian. And the first thing she said to me down in Greenfield was, "How's the PTSD?" And I was like, yeah, she knew more about me than I did. She was a research librarian. I mean, anyway, that one went by the way. This next one, oftentimes Vietnam came up in, in a conversation. So this other time, I met this woman at the People's Pint in Greenfield, and I'm going to change the names, but her name is Nikki, and within 15 minutes, she told me that her brother was a medic who was killed in Vietnam. And so, right away I had some compassion for her. And we dated, and what happened was, I wasn't a romantic interest, I was her big brother again. And she had this thirst for, about Vietnam and what her brother went through and all this. And one night I asked her in an email, I said, I'd like to write a poem to honor your brother Mark. Can you, give me some information, tell me some things about him. And she sent me this, and it's a little emotional. As I read it, I started weeping because I realized that she had written the poem. And all I did was put it in some stanza form and suggest a title. So this is all I remember of him. I was his favorite. He found me in the woods and carried me home on his shoulders when I accidentally started a fire in my basement and ran away. I was about 5. He pulled me on a toboggan to the school bus stop every day after I broke my leg while skating on a pond when I was 6. He held me outside on the front steps of our house until I got over my temper tantrum. He said, "Even Nikki is more mature than you." When my oldest sister, Carol, cleaned up the orange juice she had just thrown during an argument with my mom, with Mark coming to Mom's defense. I was probably 10, and Carol would have been about 20. He told me not to be fooled by this guy who came around for my sister, that the guy was just trying to buy my friendship by giving me candy. He bounced himself down on my bed where I was reading and asked me how our grandmother was doing when she was living with us and senile, and he was home from the Army. I was probably 12 and he was about 19. He asked me to teach him piano. I showed him how to play Hard Day's Night, and he began to teach me guitar he learned from one of his Army buddies. He wrote me letters when he was in the Army, telling me how proud he was of me when I got good grades and encouraging me to keep it up. He won a teddy bear at a carnival and brought it home for me. I kept it until my 40s. He bought me a stone owl in Colorado while in the Army. It still sits on my dresser. I remember him as having high energy. He was sociable, restless, anxious to get out in the world. I realize that the above is all I remember of him. I guess it's the same few memories playing over in my head all these years. I have always thought, hoped, that if he had lived, we would have become good adult friends. If my memory is accurate, he and I were the most alike of my siblings. That's about all I remember of him. Okay, a couple of fun facts. A few years ago, my son asked me, "Dad, how much did they pay you when you were in the Army?" And I said, I was a math major, and I said, I can figure this out. So, okay, PFC, went over to Vietnam, $120 a month, plus $60 combat pay. $180 a month, about 30 days in a month. $6 a day. 24 hours a day, because when you're sleeping in your hammock and you're on guard, you know, Charlie doesn't say, "Oh, they're off the clock now." 25 cents an hour. 25 cents an hour. However, I did get paid back later on. So I was diagnosed with PTSD. I had 30% for my leg wound, 10% for my PTSD. 10% PTSD is like being 10% pregnant. Anyway, so they reopened my case. I was able to go to college at age 40. And I decided to go to New York University and study educational theater. So I finished my bachelor's degree, got all A's, I loved being in school and all this. And my VA rep in New York says, "Well, we're sorry, Mr. Monette, that's about all we can fund you through is your BA." And I was in Dummerston, and I don't know why I did this, but I said, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I guess I'm going to have to contact Senator Jim Jeffords and Senator Patrick Leahy." And he goes, "Hold on, Mr. Monette, let me talk to my supervisor." Supervisor comes on. His name was Mr. Fink. "This is all a big misunderstanding. We'll fund you through a master's degree." About a $60,000 bluff. Charles? 2 minutes? Okay. I'm going to jump to April 20th of this past year. I know a lot of Red Sox fans are going to boo, but I was designated veteran of the game at Yankee Stadium. And I asked a friend who was an artist, I didn't want to just be me there, you know, so I wanted to bring my whole platoon with me. And I asked her if she could hand paint a shirt with their names on it. So she did. Big artist. If you can see, there's a name there, it says Bob Chi.
Yeah.
That was someone else I wanted to carry with me, Bob Tortolani. Bob stands head and shoulders above most of us. Not just because he's 6'3" or 4, but because he's giving, caring, wisdom. He's helped me so many times since I've known him. And his mantra is simply, anything for Rebecca. Thanks very much. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, that last one. Our dear friend Ernie, U.S. Army, Vietnam, 65, 67, 68. Service.
U.S. Army.
U.S. Army, all the way, right? All right, all the way.
A little different. My family history goes way back to the North Bridge in Lexington. Samuel Perham with the Chelmsford militia fought there. Families fought in 1812, fought in the Revolutionary War, Civil War, and World War II. And I served in Vietnam. Basic training, I don't remember my DI. AIT, I don't remember my DI. Jump training, I definitely remember my DI. His name was Charles Brown. The song that year was Charlie Brown. And we did a lot of double time, a lot of push-ups, and a lot of pull-ups. Ran a mile every day. Well, I was airborne. Wound up with the 82nd Airborne in Fort Bragg for 4 hours. They found out I was on a buddy system. So I wound up in Hawaii. Couldn't ask for a better station. Tiffy was a medic. I was an airborne infantryman. Volunteered to go to Vietnam, TDY as a door gunner. Came back hospitalized about 5 months and some odd days later. Came to in Hawaii. Shipped to Chelsea Naval Hospital. Went home for Christmas. Didn't remember anybody, but in March my memory came back because they sent me to Fort McClellan, Alabama to build my memory. 3,400 women on base, 900 men. Couldn't ask for a better station. I got busted. I got caught in the 3rd floor of the wax barracks at 2 o'clock in the morning. But I wound up going to Fort Benning again, supply clerk for the door gunner training there. Got my orders on my birthday, May 15th, 1967. Arrived in Vietnam, we flew out of California on the 29th of June. Arrived in Vietnam on the 1st of July. Missed the 30th altogether, so one of the guys flying with us lost his birthday. But I arrived in LBJ, Long Binh. First thing that hit me with the heat, the mildew, and the next thing that kicked my butt was the body bags. I didn't know what else to expect from then on. I was called aside and sent to the 1st Cavalry. That's my second tour. First tour I don't remember much of. I got to the 1st Cav, learned to rappel. I knew how to jump already, but I had to learn to rappel, and we never did, never had to use it. We were airborne, air mobile, air assault. The only airborne Cav unit is the 1st and the 8th Cavalry. And they started taking legs, as we call them. Those are just plain infantrymen, not airborne. Started taking legs soon after I got there in '68. We were usually a squad of 6, sometimes 5. Normal squad would have been 7 or 8. We had a leader, usually a lieutenant. We had a medic, and I was in the RTO. I carried a prick 25, 30 pounds. I packed 65 to 85 pounds of web gear a day in 110-degree heat, and took salt tablets and marched through the jungles. Once in a while, we'd wind up on LZ for a 3-day stand down. And once in a while, we'd wind up, one time I wound up in LZ English to get mail. I got to go downtown. I was downtown for a few hours before the MPs came along and picked us up. Next thing I know, I'm dropped off in the Battle of Didon. Lieutenant in front of me was lost, and a number of others were lost, and a number of others were wounded. That was my first battle experience. It's one of the top 10 battles. Second one was Battle of Tamqua, and we lost a number of men there too. But the major battle was Tet Offensive 68. We hit the manure, keep the language right, and on the 17th of February. Out of 7 in my point squad, and a Chuoi, 4 men up front were all deceased. Sergeant Williams had a blown femur in his leg. PFC Vaughn had a sucking chest wound, and the Chuoi was gone too. He was dead. We mopped up on the 26th of February, 1968. I boarded a bird and was flown back, cleared base, went to Quin Yon to see the nurse that had taken care of me in the hospital, visited with her, flew out of Vietnam 9 o'clock at night on the 1st of March. Arrived in Seattle, Washington 2 hours before I left Vietnam. I was home, stepped off a bus in Keene on the 2nd of March, 4 days after I left combat. I worked in a few machine shops, but my last 13 years with the government were spent in readjustment counseling. And when it started losing friends and stuff, that took its toll. They retired me. I've had 4 spinal fusions. I've had stomach surgery. I've had heart surgery. But I'm up and about and walking. That's all that matters. And that's my experience in Vietnam, and I'm glad you came to listen. I'm thankful for all of you here today. Thank you.
So a brief piece for my story in the military. When I was in college, high school and college, living a moment, you really didn't care much about anything other than what the next minute would provide. College was just as bad, which is why I flunked out. They told me it wasn't proper for me to head off to France for a semester abroad, rather than I should just take multiple semesters elsewhere. I joined the military. At that time, I really didn't have a sense of who I was, or what I stood for, or what I cared about, or what I would fight for. And what I learned from that experience, and it's become more and more clear, particularly as for nearly 50 years, I kind of bottled up all that stuff and didn't admit it to anybody. And then as I really started to admit that, and really started to wear that, I realized that there are principles I care about. There are ethics and morals that matter. And that's what came out of that experience. And now I know what I stand for, which I didn't before. Anyway, and that was the positive, so thanks. So we are at the tail end here. Oops, thank you. This is the tail end. Today, veterans of all wars had a chance to address their community directly and without intermediaries. As a guest or speaker, you took part in a process that returns the experience of war to our entire community, rather than just leaving it to the people who fought. Not only is this Vets Town Hall tremendously beneficial to veterans, but it may help bring communities and even the entire country together as well. Actually, the hope and the sincere wish is that from this event, from the messages of these veterans, you'll take home something that really matters, and some way that you can now connect with them. Thank you all for attending. Bob.
It's a quick question. I'm not sure if you asked if anybody else in the audience, among the veterans in the audience, want to speak.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Ron, you would like to say something? Sure. Sure, why not?
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, I'm not known for talking much. I joined the service when I was 17. My mom and dad were both Air Force, Korean War. Not over in Korea, my father was over in Korea, but my mother wasn't. She was what they call the Women's Air Force WAFs. And so I grew up with the military sort of. And then, about a year before I turned 17, the sergeant major moved in across the street from me. Had 7 daughters. Being a 17-year-old kid, I decided, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to drop out of high school and go in the Army. That'll impress the girls across the street. Guess what? It didn't. They were all anti-military. But anyways, to make a long story short, I went in, got into basic training, did more push-ups in 8 weeks than I did beforehand or afterwards. Basic training was probably the best time I had in service and the worst time. And so I consider myself quite lucky that I consider basic my worst time in the military. Also the best time. Stationed in Fort Hood, Texas, so the only experience I had in combat was a lot of short timers came back coming through Fort Hood, so I got the experience through osmosis. But basically, I joined the service to impress. And I was slightly patriotic, grew up on John Wayne and all that. But I do not regret going in, and if I had it to do over again, I'd do it again. Thank you.
With that, folks, and thanks to all of you who visited today and listened. Now is a moment for you to follow up with any one of the speakers, any way you would like to, question, probe, throw out your observations. There's still drink and snacks available. Thank you ever so much, all of you, for the time you spent today.
Thank you very much. Charlie, thank you for your kind words, as always. Thank
Thank you.
Yeah,
You brought
done well. Done well.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah.
I'm on that. See, Tuesday wasn't bad. I didn't get that hard to do.
A book, it's quite a process.
Well, I hope it gave you some relief as well.
It did. It did, and since then we've talked about it. You know, they've asked me questions. After reading it, they had a better understanding, and that's when the questions started.
That was one thing I meant to mention.
Yeah, tell me more about this or that, you know. But I really meant it when I said I've heard from people all over the country that I don't know. They just happen to have read my book. It's been rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming up.
This guy's got a lot.